Much, Brian. This past week, I took a couple of days off, Monday and Tuesday, and Caroline and I took the kids to just outside of Charlotte, this side of Charlotte, to Concord, to the Great Wolf Lodge. If you've never been or haven't heard of the Great Wolf Lodge, it's this big hotel and a combination hotel and indoor water park. But to be able to have access to the water park, you have to spend the night in the hotel. So that's how it works for them. So anyway, we were able to check in, I think 1 o'clock was the earliest on Monday. So we get there on Monday, we get checked in, we go upstairs, we get our bathing suits on, I get my new leopard print Speedo out, and so then we head downstairs to the indoor water park. As you go into it, though, they have an employee who's standing there, and they're measuring the height of all the children that go in, because some of the rides require, for safety's sake, children being of at least a certain height. Nathan, our oldest, was the first, and he stands up against this ruler, and he's over 52 inches tall. That means that he's able to get a green wristband, which means that he can ride any of the big slides in there in addition to the smaller stuff. He can ride anything that's in there without an adult being with him. So that was good. Next was Andrew, and Andrew is obviously not quite as tall as Nathan, but he falls between 42 and 48 inches. 42 and 48 inches tall, and because of that, he's able to get a yellow wristband. A yellow wristband means that there's the singular biggest ride he couldn't ride, but any of the other big rides he could ride so long as an adult was with him. So he's happy. Then it's Big Phil's turn, and we knew that this was going to be close. And Philip stands up against the ruler, and again, you know it's going to be close, and she tells him to, put your feet against the back of the wall, stand up straight, and he's standing as best he can. And I promise you, it was less than a quarter of an inch, but he fell less than a quarter of an inch short of being able to get into the yellow zone. Philip gets a red wristband. That means that all he can do is to ride the kiddie stuff and some of like the wave pool and that type of thing he could get in, but none of the big slides that his brothers were going to be able to get on could he get on at all, even with an adult. At this point, the Great Wolf Lodge was able to turn off all their water pumps because Philip was producing enough tears to maintain everything and all the slides, and it was just pitiful. But we explained to him, Big Phil, listen, I am so sorry. I promise, though, the next time you come, I am sure you're going to be tall enough to ride whatever it is that you want. But, Mommy and Daddy don't make the rules, but we have to follow them. And with that red wristband, you're not going to be able to do that. And so we're finally able to get him calmed down to a point where he's able to at least somewhat enjoy himself in these younger kid areas. And he's doing fine until such time that his brothers come off one of these big slides, and they're talking about how much fun they have had. And then all of a sudden, Big Phil's bottom lip goes out and the tears begin to pour again. Caroline and I at this point are thinking, this is going to be a long 2 days here. And so she had seen some other kids with these, and she said, they've got these wolf ear things. It's the Great Wolf Lodge, the wolf theme. And it's a headband with these, for lack of a better word, look like stuffed animal wolf ears on top of it. And she said, I wonder if we offer to get him some of those, if he'll be okay. And so I thought, well, it's worth a shot. So I go over and I say, Big Phil, listen, would you like, since you can't ride these other rides, would you like if Mommy and Daddy would get you a set of those wolf ears? He had a simple question. He said, will my brothers get any? I said, no. I said, no, they won't be able to, and we're getting this for you because they're able to do things that you can't. They're able to ride rides that you can't. And so at that point, Philip decided he was okay with that. We got him some of those ears, and he calms down. Now, though he was okay, he was still just kind of okay because it still bothered him. He knew that he was missing out. There was fun that his brothers were having that he simply could not. And thankfully, though, the next day, I had gone downstairs to take some stuff out to the van, and Philip had gone with me, and I decided I'm going to take him and see if I can get him measured, and I'm going to see if I can work this a little bit. And so the employee is standing there, and I tell Big Phil before he gets over there, I said, when you step up against that ruler, you take a deep breath, and you stand as tall as you possibly can. And so Big Phil goes in there, and before, he missed it by about that much. This time he was in the yellow by about that much. And you have never seen a 4-year-old more ecstatic than he was to get a yellow wristband. I mean, this made Big Phil's day. And at this point, what we have seen is him go from the pits of despair to the mountaintops of joy and exuberance and everywhere in between. Too many times in terms of feeling, in terms of happiness, for us as believers, we're kind of like that. There's these really low points, there's these really high points, and if you were to average them out, we'd fall somewhere kind of in the middle. You know, if I were to ask you, are you really happy? I mean, really happy in the Lord? A lot of you would say, well, you know, I'm not really thrilled. I'm not really despondent. I'd say kind of somewhere in the middle. I mean, there's some peaks, there's some valleys, just kind of somewhere in the middle. Okay. Another word for okay is mediocre. What I want you to understand, though, is that in terms of your happiness with and in God, the Lord does not want for you as His child to be one that is just kind of, okay. He doesn't want you to be just kind of quasi-satisfied and tolerant of your happiness in Him, because this is His expectation, and He's made it very clear, where He says, rejoice in the Lord always. That's what He expects. That's what He's called us to do, but so many times we're stuck somewhere at the mediocre level. So the question is, how do we get from mediocre to rejoicing in the Lord always? Well, that's going to happen when we make a couple of choices that Paul points out for us in Philippians chapter 4. Philippians chapter 4, if you would look with me in your Bibles there today, we'll begin reading with verse 4. Philippians chapter 4, starting with verse 4. Paul says this, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your gentleness be made known to all men. The Lord is at hand. Be anxious for nothing, but in everything, by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. All right, so what we're talking about today is how to rejoice, to get happy, and be happy in the Lord at all times. How can we do that? I said it's going to involve a couple of choices, and here's the first one. You must choose to forego your rights. Choose to forego your rights. Well, we're continuing, and for a number of weeks, and we've still got a couple more weeks left in this, walking through the 3rd and 4th chapters of Philippians. And doing so in a series that I've called, I Can't Get No Satisfaction, and I'm Glad. And what we've been talking about is mediocrity, and how God doesn't want mediocrity for us in our walks with Him. We've talked about how He doesn't want us to be just kind of okay, not really great, not really bad followers of His, but on fire, fully committed, deep, passionate walks with Him. Last week we talked about how God doesn't want for us as believers to just have kind of mediocre, okay relationships with each other. He wants us to have meaningful, positive, and healthy relationships with each other. But of concern for us this morning is this whole idea of having happiness in God that's not just kind of okay, but it's through the roof. That you're happy in the Lord at all times. Well, how do we experience this? Well, we start with verse 4. We have this statement, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say rejoice. Now, this verse is in the imperative mood. That which is imperative is not a suggestion. It's not a hint. It's not food for thought. It's a command. So we have this command, rejoice in the Lord always. To underscore exactly what he's saying, though, and to make it all the more clear, he says, again, I will say, rejoice. The word that Paul uses there that's translated as rejoice in the Greek word that he uses that's translated as rejoice is kairete, and literally means to be joyful, be happy. You plug that back into the verse, Paul is saying, be happy in the Lord when? Always. At all times. When life is great, you be happy in the Lord. But on the flip side, when life stinks, when you feel like your back is against the wall, when the walls are pressing in and the circumstances stink, be happy in the Lord. Well, that's far easier said than done, so how are we going to be able to do that? Well, before you think about that, let me ask you this. Is that something that you want? I sure hope that it is. I mean, who wants to just be kind of, I'm just kind of okay in and with the Lord? Do you want that, or do you want to be happy, regardless of circumstances, rejoicing, happy, joyful in the Lord? Well, for that to happen, you've got to do what Paul continues to describe, where he says in verse 5, let your gentleness be made known to all men. The Lord is at hand. The word that's translated there as gentleness is the Greek word epieikos. Now that means little to you, but it is a word that has very much confounded New Testament translators. And the reason for that is this. It's a word that does not in English have an exact parallel. There's not an exact equivalent in English for this Greek word. So what they've tried to do is to come up with an English word that's kind of close. And gentleness was the best that they could come up with. But the word is a term that contains the element of selflessness, where you do not insist on and are not demanding your personal rights. It's a willingness to yield your personal rights to show consideration and graciousness towards others. So it's foregoing, an intentional, willing foregoing of your rights. Now about this, Paul says that this is to be so true of us, that this is a characteristic, that this is a trait that we ought to so pursue and possess that we become known by it. Again, he says that this should be known in verse 5 to all men. Now, if this is an idea of selflessness and foregoing your rights, you've got to recognize that for us as Americans, specifically American believers, this is a tough pill for us to swallow. After all, not simply as people, but especially as Americans, we're part of a country that hinges on and that very much revolves around individual and personal rights. For example, in our founding documents, the Declaration of Independence presupposes that we have innate, natural-born rights. Among them are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, our ultimate governing document as a country is the Constitution. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution are called collectively what? The Bill of Rights. And so this means that as an American citizen, there are certain rights that you have, the things that you are entitled to, regardless of your age, regardless of your gender, regardless of your race, regardless of anything. These are rights that you are entitled to as an American. There's things that you can do. You're entitled to do some things. If you want a gun, well, you're entitled to be able to have a gun. If you want to worship or not worship, well, you've got freedom of religious expression. The Constitution affords that. We have this right to worship freely or not worship. We're entitled to that. Beyond that, if you want to say something, you're free to say something. You want to say something that's negative and hurtful of somebody else or negative even against the government itself? Well, you can do that because you've got the right to free speech. These are things that you are entitled to. Now here's where the rub comes in. We take this American mentality of rights and entitlement, and then we come to the Scriptures, and we come to our relationship with God. And we then operate with God as though there are certain things that we are entitled to. Chief among them are these: personal happiness and personal comfort. You know, as an American, I'm entitled to all these things, and then I come to God and I operate under this notion, most of us operate under this notion, that I'm entitled to at least a couple of things: personal happiness and personal comfort. This is what I am entitled to. Now hear me in this. I want you to understand that the God who made everything, the God of this universe, owes Michael Owens, and he owes you not one blessed thing. Zero, zilch. You are entitled to nothing. Nothing in God. He owes you zero. There is nothing before Him that you are entitled to. Now understand, this may be, and for us in particular as Americans, is a tough pill to swallow, but sometimes the truth hurts. But understand that this is not simply an important, it is an essential principle for you to get into your mind. But far more than into your mind, get it etched on your heart so that you begin to live out this principle. Because hear me in this. You will never, ever be able to do what God has called us to do, to be happy in Him at all times, so long as we're operating on the notion that God owes me anything. Well, how does this work? Let me see if I can paint the picture for you. We are this week beginning the month of October, and October in our family begins a series of months where we have birthdays in our house virtually every month. Andrew's is in October, Nathan comes around in December, Catherine is January, I'm February, Philip is March, and Caroline is April. So we got all these birthdays coming up. Now, my birthday and Caroline's birthdays, those aren't that big of a deal, but the kids' birthdays are a bigger deal in our house. That being said, we don't do something enormous or anything, but we do get the family together and have a little birthday party for them. And so the grandparents will come in, the aunts and uncles get together, we have a little birthday meal, and then they'll have a cake, and then they'll get presents. This past March, for example, we had a birthday party for Philip. And prior to the family getting there, we reminded, as we have done so many times before, we reminded the other siblings, in this case, Nathan and Andrew, we reminded them, listen, this is Philip's birthday. And because of that, he's going to be getting some gifts today. He's going to be getting birthday presents. You're not going to be getting any presents because it's not your birthday, it's his. Now, they didn't love that thought, but they understood that thought. And so they're recognizing, okay, Philip's going to be getting things and I'm getting nothing. They got that. All right, so the family begins to show up. We have the meal, we have the cake, and then it's time for Big Phil to start opening gifts. And so he's getting some from the grandparents. Then my sister, who is like, she's like our own personal Santa Claus, she shows up. And she gives to Philip several gifts, but one of which is in a gift bag, and he opens it, and inside is a cap gun and a holster. Not one of these new, silly, not-looking real cap guns. You know those orange things that they've got now. Now, this is one of these old-style die-cast metal, good-looking, great cap guns. And so Philip gets this with a holster. He's thrilled to get this. And his brothers are looking at it, and about that time, though, Christy pulls out two other gift bags, one for Nathan and one for Andrew. And they start pulling the stuff outside, and what do they have? Now, inside for them is the exact same cap gun. Now, Philip was thrilled to get this. He's getting this for his birthday. But now, Nathan and Andrew, they're equally thrilled. Why? Because they started with this notion, I'm getting nothing. And so when I get anything at all, I'm thrilled. Do you not see where I'm going with this? If you operate under the notion that the God of heaven, the one who upholds everything by his power, the one who made you and made all that exists, that he owes you nothing. When you begin today, when you begin tomorrow, when you begin this week, this month, this year, when you begin each day operating under this notion, this correct notion, that God owes me nothing, when he gives anything, how do you feel? Man, you're thrilled. You're thinking, you know what, he didn't have to give me anything, but he's given me this. And you get even excited about basic things, like the fact that you can get up in the morning, that you've even got a bed to get up from, that you've got a house, an apartment, or something that bears your name on it, that is a place that you can get out of the cold or the hot, the rain. That you've got people in your life that are meaningful and consequential to you, that you love and that love you. That you've got enough to be able to get a meal, enough to be able to keep the lights on. Even the most basic things you become exceptionally thankful for and thrilled over. Why? Because you're beginning with this notion, God owes me nothing. I'm not entitled to anything. My personal comfort, I'm not entitled to personal happiness. He owes me nothing. And when you operate in that notion, when he gives anything, and we know that he gives much, then you're thrilled over it. That you come to recognize all the more what James says, that every good and perfect gift, it comes from the Father above. Listen, if you want to get happy and stay happy in the Lord, it's going to require a choice that you forego your rights. And you say, God, you owe me nothing. And so I'm going to be satisfied with whatever it is that you bring into my life. But there's a second choice that you've got to make, and that's this. Choose to exchange worry. Choose to exchange worry. Now, back in verse 4, we've got a difficult statement. A statement that's a lot easier to say than it is to do. To rejoice, to be happy in the Lord always. Now, about the time we thought that was a tough thing to do, we get to verse 6 and we find the MacDaddy of them. Be anxious for nothing. Now, the word that's translated there as anxious means to fret, to worry about. Do not fret, do not worry, do not be anxious about what? About anything. Financial stuff? That's anything. Problems in a marriage, problems with your kids, problems at school, that's anything. Problems with your health, problems making decisions, that's anything. Be anxious about, do not fret, do not worry about anything. Now that's a lot easier said than done. It was easier for Paul to write it than it was to do it. It's easier for us to read it and talk about than it is to do it. But let me ask you this. Why is it that we worry? Why is it that you worry? I worry. Would any of us worry about anything? Now when push comes to shove, why do we worry about anything? Really, I believe the reason for it is this. There's a lot of stuff that we don't know. Isn't that why we worry? Do you worry when you know what the outcome is going to be? No. We worry about that which we do not know that could turn out negatively. So worry is this feeling. Worry is this act that occurs in the presence of that which is unknown, in the presence of fear about negative circumstances. You pick anything that you worry about, that you have worried about just in recent days, weeks, or months. Isn't that why you were worrying? Because there was some component of your circumstances you didn't know how it was going to turn out, and you were fearful that it was going to be negative. That's why we worry about anything. Well, this morning, it's entirely possible that you, when you got here today and you looked at the bulletin, you got worried. Maybe what has gone on at your house is that before you left this morning, you put a roast in the oven and you set the timer so that it would come on at this particular time and be done at this particular time. You get here and you look at the bulletin and you say, okay, check, okay, the invitation, business meeting. Business meeting? Like communism is that? Business meeting. And you get worried. Why? Because you're telling yourself, that could last a couple of minutes, it could last longer. I don't know how long it's going to last, and if it lasts longer than I anticipate, well, then lunch is ruined. So why are you worrying? Because there's something that you do not know, and you're fearful of a negative outcome. That's why we worry about anything. Now, you recognize there's a lot more that we don't know than we do know. You recognize that, don't you? I mean, the truth is, all that you or I know is what is going on right now with us and what we have experienced thus far, if we can even remember that, right? That's all that we know. You do not know what everyone else, even in this room, is going to be doing this afternoon or was doing yesterday. Furthermore, even if you knew the schedule of their activities, you do not know what they were thinking. You don't know exactly what they were feeling. Beyond that, about the future, none of us knows anything. There is far more that we do not know than what we do know. So how can we do anything other than worry? You know, if worry is rooted in lack of knowledge, lack of understanding of how things are going to unfold, and how they unfold could be negative, man, there's so much more that we don't know than what we do, so how can we do anything other than worry? Well, thankfully, Paul does not stop there. He does not simply say, be anxious for nothing, period. Rather, he says, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Now, truthfully, we could camp out here and deal with those words that he uses, prayer, supplication, and thanksgiving, for a considerable period of time. But I know you've got a roast in the oven, so let me see if I can break this down for you. Again, and we talked about this just a moment ago, there is far more that you do not know than what you do know. Consequently, there is much that you can and you will be tempted to worry about. Instead of doing that, Paul is asking us, telling us to do something through prayer. That's just plain talking to God. Through supplication, which is another word for petition, where you're making a request. He says, when you're experiencing uncertainty about the future, fearful of negative consequences, will you just go and talk to God about it? Through prayer. Will you share your request with Him? To tell Him what it is that you're asking Him to do. But he says to do so with what? He says with thanksgiving. Well, what are we going to be thankful for? Well, again, we talked about just a moment ago, we're operating under this notion, the God of heaven owes me nothing. So however he responds, whatever he gives, whatever guidance, whatever intervention he does into our circumstances, I'm going to be thankful for it. So that even before God does anything, you're able to say, I want to thank you in advance for what you're going to do. So you get what I'm saying? There's a lot that you don't know, a lot that's uncertain. So why don't you talk to the one that knows everything? And as you do, tell him what you need. Tell him what you're feeling. And be thankful in advance for whatever he's going to do. And then something significant happens. You become the wonderful beneficiary of a great promise that you see in verse 7. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Let me ask you this. How do you feel? How would you describe your feelings when you worry? Would you say, man, it's great. It feels good. No, you'd say it feels lousy because inside there is this turmoil, there's this tension, there is this unease. Now, if I were to ask you to write down adjectives that would describe your internal feelings when you worry, or even now when you are worrying, would any of you use the word peace or peaceful? No, we would say that our feelings are the exact opposite of peace. So, do you see what he's saying here? Given our limited knowledge, that we really do know so very little, we're going to have circumstances, perhaps this afternoon, certainly this week, that are going to spawn the temptation to worry. When that temptation to worry renders itself, will you just stop? Will you spend some time talking to God about it? Will you share with Him the requests that you've got about it, thanking Him in advance for what He's going to do? When that happens, what you will experience is going from these feelings of tumult, of turmoil, of unease, of tension, of anxiety, to what he describes as a peace that surpasses understanding. This peace it's not that it merely suffices for, but surpasses understanding. Why does he say it's a peace that surpasses understanding? Well, again, we talked about this. We worry because there's a lot that we don't know, and things could turn out bad. Worry is the reasonable, rational response to an uncertain future. It's perfectly normal. It's perfectly logical to worry in the face of uncertainty. If, however, you're doing what God is asking you to do, calling on you to do, Paul's inviting us to do, that you talk to God about this, that through prayer, petition, through thanks, you share this with Him. What happens is that instead of feeling turmoil and tumult and anxiety and tension, you experience peace. And it won't make any sense for you to experience peace. Listen, there are going to be some times, really dark times, and you have probably perhaps already been through some of those, but there's more yet to come. And maybe it is that with your spouse, maybe with you, maybe with a child, something shows up in a physical and the doctor says, we need to do some more tests. And they start with something as simple as a chest x-ray. And all of a sudden they tell you, we found a mass. And you hear that, and what stinks about that is that it typically takes at least days, if not in fact weeks, before you to find out fully what it is that you've got to get your arms around. You don't know, is this something benign? Is it something of no concern? Is it something consequential that maybe could take my life? And so you are very much uncertain about what the future is going to hold, and things could turn out to be very painful, very tragic, very hurtful. And so if you're experiencing that, what's logical, what makes sense, is to worry about it. But if you decide, you know what, instead of doing that, I'm going to talk to the Lord about it. I'm going to give this to Him. God's promise, very simply, is that He'll give you a peace that won't make any sense. It's not going to make sense to have a doctor say, we found something, and for you in your heart to be okay with God about it. That you're not waving your fist and saying, God, why is this happening to me? How can this happen? I've got other kids to look out for. I've got reason to live. There's work left to be accomplished. God, I don't understand this. Instead, you're able, in the face of unpleasant, unnerving circumstances, to experience absolute peace in your heart. But Paul says it's a double blessing. Not only is it this experience of peace, but he says that it has this other function, that it guards your heart and it guards your mind. So God gives you this peace that doesn't make any sense while you're experiencing giving the circumstances. That's a blessing in itself, but then it has this other blessing that it's standing guard to the door of your heart, to the door of your mind, to prevent even further worry. Listen, that's an amazing blessing. What Paul is talking about, what he's encouraging us to do, is to make an exchange. To exchange our worry, our fretting, our anxiety for a peace that surpasses understanding. At the outset of the message, I talked about having gone to the Great Wolf Lodge, and to be able to go, again, you have to stay in the hotel. So we were going to spend Monday night there. We get there at 1 o'clock on Monday afternoon. We check in. We go to our room, get our bathing suits on. We spend the rest of the afternoon in the water. That evening, we get showered, changed. We have supper. We spend the night there. We get up the next morning, and we're entitled to be able to stay in the water park from the time it opens at 10 in the morning until it closes at 8 o'clock at night. But the catch is we have to check out of our room by 11 o'clock. So before we go downstairs to the water park, I get our suitcase and our stuff, our toiletries, all those things bagged up, put back in the suitcase, and I carry those out to the car. But there's still some things that we need. We need a change of clothes. We need our keys. We need our phones. We've got this stuff that I don't want to just leave sitting out somewhere. But I don't have a room that I can put it in. I can't put it in the car because when I lock that, I'm locked out. So what do? Thankfully, they've got lockers there in the water park. And how it works, though, is that you got to have a key to open them. And so to get a key, what you wind up doing is going upstairs to the gift shop. And you give them $20, and they give you a key with a wristband on it so that it won't fall off in the water. So that's nice, but $20 to rent a locker kind of stinks. But that's what we had to do. Now, here's the deal. When you are through with that key, you take it back to the gift shop, and they give you $10 back. So instead of it costing $20, it only costs you $10, but you got to take the key back. So on Tuesday morning, I've got the van loaded. I keep this other stuff out. I put it in this locker that I've gotten the key. I've given them $20. They give me the key. So we have our fun in the water. It's time for us to get ready to change, to head back to Greensboro. And so we use the showers and the bathrooms there. And we've got our shoes on. We're ready to head out. But before we go to the van, I make one quick stop at the gift shop. Why? Because I've got a key that is no longer of benefit to me, that's not of use to me, and I would rather have my $10. So what I do is very simply give them the key, and they give me $10. The key is of no benefit, so I exchange it for that which is, and I get my $10 back. Do you recognize that's exactly what God, through Paul, is calling us to do? To take worry, something that stinks, something that doesn't feel good, something that doesn't add a day to your life, that doesn't make your day any more blessed or happy. In fact, it ruins it. To take that which benefits you nothing and exchange it for that which is of real value, for peace that surpasses understanding. If I can tie all of this together this morning, think with me a simple thought. If you will just take God at His word, if you'll do what He's asking you, calling for you to do, that with Him you forego a sense of entitlement. Say, you know what, God, you owe me nothing, and live based on that understanding. And you'll come to experience satisfaction with whatever He gives. If you'll exchange your worry for His promise of peace, how then do you think you're going to feel about having a relationship with Him? I'll tell you, you're going to be thrilled. You're going to be happy. And that even when your circumstances stink, you are happy. You are rejoicing in the Lord when? At all times. Listen, God's telling us how we can experience it, how we can experience unending happiness in Him. The question very simply for you today is, how much do you want it? Won't you bow your heads with me?